Live longer, be even better in bed just by doing yoga? Well, it certainly seems like a tall order, but one world-famous guru claims his special brand of hot yoga can do all of that and more.
Hi everybody, welcome back to the wellness community. Firstly, I just want to start off with saying thank you for all the support. I've received so much great feedback and things to work on, which I'm very grateful for, and I just hope that we can continue to grow this community as much as possible, because I think that this platform is needed, and that's why I started it. So I promised myself that I would give a little intro about what this community is about, just basically bringing darkness to light about the wellness community and everything that goes on behind the scenes that you might not be aware of, but you can know, or maybe if you have a voice about what's happened to you. It's so encouraging to hear other people's stories about what they've been through in the wellness community and how they've healed from it. So speaking of healing, I think it's very imperative that I emphasize that this episode is going to be about how I believe we can heal from the Bikram Yoga community. So my past 2 episodes have been focusing mainly on Bikram and who he was from a teacher standpoint, the community. I never met him, I just want to make that clear, but I did teach at a few different Bikram studios. I noticed a toxicity there. In fact, it was the most toxic environment that I have been in that I can remember, because sometimes we forget certain circumstances, but from just a professional standpoint, it was one of the most toxic experiences. So I wanted to bring light to that, and I always believe that if I bring up a problem, I need to bring up a solution too. I don't just want to complain and rant and bring up people's and trigger people, because there is always light. There's always light, no matter how dark the circumstance may seem. So, as I always say, this is my opinion, and please do not go after the Bikram Studios or form Bikram Studios and demand that they act a certain way or harass them. That's not the point of this podcast. The point is just to listen. I am going to listen too. There'll be people coming onto the podcast. I've been doing some bookings, and soon I will just be listening to different people's stories. But I thought it was imperative to get this out of the way, my story out of the way, particularly about Bikram, because I feel like I felt like I could provide a unique standpoint from being in it, especially because I came to Los Angeles straight after Bikram Chowdhury left. So I just want to start off with the first way that I feel that the Bikram Yoga community can heal. The first way that I feel like the Bikram community can heal is through accountability. And whenever I hear that word accountability, I feel like it carries a lot of weight, and often the kind of weight that people don't want to be associated with. So I would highly recommend, if you haven't listened or watched my last week's podcast, I say listen because you can listen on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and you can watch it on YouTube or under the Unwellness community. So I feel like if you haven't watched it, definitely watch it, listen. But something that I mentioned last week was that I felt deep tension from management at studios, owners at studios, and I'm going to be specific about the Bikram community in this episode. Later on, I'll be talking about other other industries too. But I want to be specific about the Bikram community because I feel like it's very, very, very important, especially because around the world, probably millions of people practice Bikram Yoga, myself included. I still practice. I actually do it at home now because I live in Los Angeles, and right now we are not necessarily in lockdown, but due to my personal circumstances, I can't go into the studios. So I feel very strongly that it's time for the owners and management of different studios to take accountability. So what would accountability look like, and how could this be implemented? And I strongly feel like the studio owners, if they choose to keep them open, then it's time for them to approach their studios in a more kind and loving way. So I spoke 2 weeks ago, I spoke about my pay and how I was really pissed when I got my pay reduced as opposed to a pay raise. So I want to start with that. I feel like if managers, owners of studios approach the teachers as though they are human first and not just a body that can be replaced. And I feel like that's a common thread in particularly the Bikram studios. Teachers are treated as though they can be replaced. And you know, that leads me to one of my theories that I have for the dialogue. And I think that the dialogue, if you're unfamiliar with it, it's 26 postures and 2 breathing exercises. And I believe that this dialogue is created to kind of like brainwash us, to make us feel like we are replaceable. Because I've had wonderful, amazing teachers that don't follow the dialogue, and they get the gist of it. They know exactly what to say, what to do. One of my favorite teachers in New York, I'm not going to say her name because I don't want to put her on, she deserves privacy, but in New York, she's one of the older teachers. I believe she's going to be 72 this year or something like that. But she's one of my favorite teachers, and she didn't follow dialogue. So I believe, and this is just my opinion, I think that studios that want to implement only following the dialogue kind of give this like brainwashed impression, or for lack of better word, idea that you are replaceable. You definitely feel that. I felt like that teaching at a Bikram studio. So I think that's how the accountability can shift, is that owners of studios need to treat their teachers as though they are unique for their teaching style. And when I often say that, I feel like sometimes I get backlash of like, well, you're not special, you are replaceable. And if you currently look at the time that I am taping this, it is Friday the 15th of October. And last night I saw job reports about how employees are quitting and employers are having difficulty keeping their employees. And I think this has a lot to do with it, because we are in a society where employers have this idea that somebody else can replace the person you're with. And as a whole, it's just a horrible approach to approach life with. You know, if you think that the person that's working for you or anybody in your life is replaceable, because nobody is replaceable. So I think if they started with that, like being genuine. I remember there was this studio owner in Silver Lake, and you could just tell, like, every time she walked through the door, you could just tell she just didn't want to be there. And I thought it was so sad, and you could tell that it was clearly about money for her. And I think that's another way that studios can be held accountable. I'm not saying don't practice Bikram. I'm not saying don't go to the studios. But if you practice and you've never taught, maybe ask your teacher how she's being treated, you know? Maybe ask her, does the studio care about the teachers? Just things like that, you know, because I feel like that might go a longer way than you realize. Something else that I feel is very obvious in the Bikram community from what I've seen is that it's money driven, and I touched on that in my last point. It's very money driven, and I mean, you would maybe it is an extension of Bikram as a person because he loves his Rolls Royce and all that kind of stuff, but I don't know that. I don't know him as a person, but I will tell you that I do sense a sense of greed in the Bikram Yoga community coming from the studio owners. There's a sense of like, you should be lucky you get to teach approach, so that stops them from spending money on their teachers, spending money on their studios, because I think the same way about students. I feel like sometimes students are told why, like, you're honored, you should be so grateful to even practice Bikram Yoga. So for me, I think it's a mentality shift from the studio owners that can be held accountable. Now, I do want to talk about the teachers too, because I've met some really nasty teachers, Bikram Yoga teachers, and I think that they can be held accountable too. Now, I've seen, oh my gosh, I've seen like teachers yelling at students. I've seen teachers fight with students. I definitely have seen, and not just at Bikram. I think Bikram, it's amplified because of the tension and because there is this, to me, idea of the student should be grateful that they even get to practice. But I do sense that there's like deep narcissism and condescension from the teachers to the students, even to sometimes the owners. Like sometimes I've heard teachers speak to owners. It's usually the other way around, but sometimes I have heard teachers speak to owners in a very disrespectful manner. And maybe it's because they got it, they're giving it back, you know, that mentality. I'm not sure, but I just think all round respect needs to be brought back into teaching. And I also, something that really resonated with me, because like I said 2 weeks ago, I watched hours and hours because I was so fascinated with the practice. And I am an Aquarius, and when we become obsessed with a subject, a person, something, we will study it, you know, day and night. So for months, I would just watch interviews of him, listening to what he said. I would listen to his dialogue. I'm talking about Bikram, and I would really, really study what gave him the idea to create these postures. I mean, the sequence. And obviously he mentions Vishnu Ghosh, but something that he said really, really profound, it was profound to me. And that's actually when I decided to stop teaching yoga, when I had this feeling. And he said, when you feel like it becomes a chore, I'm paraphrasing, but the gist of it was that when you feel like it has become a chore, then you should not teach anymore. And when I had that feeling, I had it in December of 2019, around about the time the Netflix documentary came out, actually, which is really funny. But I had it in December 2019, and then I soon, I actually left all the Bikram studios that I teach at, and then the following year, I left, I quit teaching completely because I had this feeling like I wasn't being rewarded. I had this feeling like I had to go all around Los Angeles I got my tax returns back. I remember, because during the pandemic, I was kind of not necessarily going through the motions, but things didn't really sink in the way that they did during the pandemic. So once I got my tax returns and I got the time to really sit with it, I saw that I made half full-time teaching than I did when I was just teaching part-time and had a regular job. So it was very disheartening to me, like, to really sit with that and to feel like, hey, I'm not being appreciated, and I spent so much money getting the teacher training only to be told, meanwhile the regular job I didn't need any training. I made 4 times what I did that regular job. So once these numbers sank in, it really disheartened me, and I was at the point where I had already not wanted to teach anymore and just felt like, I think it's time for me to go. So I do think that respect all around needs to be brought back, and the passion for yoga in general. I don't believe that the yoga studios that I taught for, there's any passion for Bikram anymore, or passion for yoga. It seems like there's this energy of everybody's wrong, especially at this yoga studio that I taught at in Silver Lake, the worst working experience of my life. The owner would always assume that something was wrong before it happened. And I feel like that's in general, because when I taught at other studios, Bikram studios, it was implied that too, but not as drastic as that particular studio in Silver Lake. So I do strongly feel like accountability needs to be brought, and how is by respect, paying people properly, and just treating everybody like humans again. The second way I think that the Bikram Yoga community can heal is pay. And I mention this quite often, and people would often say, I think the biggest gaslighting phrase to not pay teachers well is, well, you should do it because you love it, And I was working with a mentor from 2015 to 2017, and he was big on being paid what you think you deserve. So I was living in like 2 worlds, where on my regular job I was being paid what I deserved, and then teaching yoga I was being paid not what I felt like I deserved, but I was like, I love it so much, it's okay if I compromise a little bit. This voice that my mentor would drill into me about being paid appropriately, it really continued even more and more and more. And now in my life, I really I will not take a job. I will not work for free. I will not take a job if I'm making less than I should be, because it is such an insult to my experience, to what I bring to the table, and I'm just not willing to do it anymore. So looking back at when I first started teaching yoga, and first started teaching at these yoga studios in general, I would have asked for more money. And that's a teacher's, I feel, responsibility. But I think the reason why I didn't was that I felt replaceable. I felt like if I say no, then I won't be able to teach, So I also, especially because yoga teachers, especially in Los Angeles, it's very interesting to me, hardly make anything. And when I moved here, I planned to teach full-time and have my privates on the side, but it got to the point where I was teaching so much, because you kind of have to stay on the schedule. I didn't even really have time for my private clients, and I became it's just very draining to have to drive to different areas, and because you can't necessarily teach at a specific studio for a lot of your time, you have to navigate around that. So I would highly recommend that the studios take the initiative to pay teachers at least $100 a class. And I have not actually made that. I'm even teaching almost 10 years. I did not make that, which I think is very fortunate, because I've heard some teachers have, and that's kind of the politics of how studios work in general, not just Bikram. But I think it's very important for the studios themselves to pay their teachers more, so that the quality is better and therefore they attract more students. Because you'll often hear, and that was the excuse given to me when I asked for a raise, was like, we don't have enough people coming in. So there's this kind of pressure on teachers to bring in a certain amount of students. There's this pressure to post on Instagram, there's this pressure to post on Facebook, and I love social media, so it's not about that, but I think just the fundamental, whether a teacher decides to be on social media or not, they should be paid $100 a class. And it also falls on the studio owner to make sure that they are doing their own marketing, and it doesn't just fall on the teachers, because I've seen some studio owners get really, really lazy that way. So pay, to me, is a sign of respect, and that you value what your employees do for you. So I highly, highly recommend that teachers should be paid at least $100 a class. The third way that I feel like the yoga community, Bikram yoga community, can heal is by returning to the foundation of yoga. So particularly, the reason why I wanted to do the documentary before I did this episode, where I debunked the Netflix documentary last week, I wanted to do that before because I wanted to show you how little it has become about yoga. And I moved to Los Angeles after Bikram had left, like literally, if I can remember correctly, and please don't quote me on dates, I feel like he left a few months just before I came, in beginning of 2017, because I came at the end of 2017. So and also that's up in the air, because some people say later, some people say earlier, so I don't exactly know when he left. I can tell you though that it has become about him, whether he meant to or not. I'm not going to put this on him, but because there's so much drama about him, how the energy in the studios, the documentaries, and from what I've seen, a lot of the studio owners absolutely love it. They feel like, from just what I can tell, they kind of like the attention that it brings, but then it's also like a catch-22 because it's not always good attention. And something actually, after the Bikram documentary, a lot of students would come to me and be like, did you watch documentary? And I'd be like, yeah, I did watch it. And the first thing most students would say, and I'm not judging them, I'm just noticing, they would say, it inspired my practice. It made me want to practice more. And I thought, wow, that is so fascinating. They completely, not bypassed, but I'm surprised that the first thing that's most important is them saying that they want to practice more, as opposed to, what is my teacher going through? What does she or he have to go through to be in this community? What's happening behind the scenes? Because that would fascinate me more. But again, I'm an Aquarius. I like mystery and I love to see things on a deeper level. So I just found it very interesting. But then it also reminded me that the reason why they come is not for Bikram. It's not for the drama. It's for the yoga. So I think if there is a return and a respect to Bikram Yoga, and I want to say this, I have never taught at the studio. I've actually never been to the studio, but two of my friends teach at a former Bikram studio in Burbank, and they only have great things to say about it. But something that she does, the owner, that I've heard, so I'm not fully sure if she still does it, is that they have workshops about the yoga. And that's how it used to be. It was very focused on the postures. And somewhere along the line, I feel like in the past 4 to 5 years, it's just become about Bikram, 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 Bikram. And as a teacher, having to dodge all these questions and having to hear people, like if I say, hey, I practice Bikram Yoga or I teach Bikram Yoga, this energy of like, oh, why would you be associated with that person? And for me, it was never about the person. Like I said, I never even met him. The yoga, Bikram Yoga, because I've been doing yoga since I was a teenager on and off, but there's something so powerful about Bikram Yoga, the 26 postures and 2 breathing exercises. And I know I sound crazy when I say that. I've tried to get people that are close to me to do it, and they think I'm like a part of a cult. But there's something so powerful about that yoga, that specific yoga. It has healed me of my back pain, my knee issues, my emotional issues, my mental issues. And I'm not saying if you have any psychological issues, this will help you. It's helped me, but I'm not saying that this is a diagnosis for anybody that has any issues. It has helped me immensely. Nothing else in my life has helped me heal like Bikram Yoga has. And I will say that for the rest of my life. So I just feel that it's unfortunate that the drama surrounding owners, the drama surrounding Bikram Chowdhury, the drama surrounding all these other factors that are just so minute is distracting the respect, the humanity, just the overall community, because there's something so precious that this yoga brings to millions of people, probably a day, that I think we need to focus more on. And I think sometimes the studio owners are running away from being labeled as a Bikram studio because they don't want to be associated with the darkness. But like I've said in the past 2 episodes, they have a responsibility too. We all do. We all do. If we see, they say, if you see something, say something. If we see something, we should say something. And that brings me to something that I actually wasn't allowed to talk about before because I signed an NDA. I was sexually harassed at a studio that I used to work at, a Bikram studio, because it's happened at another yoga studio, but this particularly was a Bikram yoga studio. And the response that I received when I did say something about it was, oh, well, kind of what do you expect, because you're wearing a 2-piece. The owner, that came from the owner. She was very dismissive, and she said, oh, that's how men are. She tried to sweep it under the rug. I ended up suing, and I had to sign a non-disclosure, which now is void if this happens, if it's a sign of harassment or abuse in a non-disclosure agreement. So I am allowed to speak about it now, but I wasn't for a long time. And when students would see me at other studios after I left, it was so uncomfortable to not be able to tell them. So now I can say what happened. I was sexually harassed, and I sued them because I was made to feel. In fact, she completely ignored it. I had to keep saying, hey, this is happening to me. And it was by another employee who was very insistent. I mean, when you get close to other employees, you kind of want to go out with each other, not in a romantic way, it doesn't have to be, but he took it to another level that I felt very uncomfortable with. And I initially spoke to management. She apologized for him, but then she spoke to the owner, and the owner spoke to me and was just like, oh, he's a guy, what are you wearing? That kind of energy. So that energy very, very much exists in the Bikram Yoga community. And I think that also falls into accountability, but it also highlights how far away it has gotten from the yoga and needs to be returned to the love of the 8 limbs of yoga, the passion for the healing aspect of it, and enough with the extra stuff. So the fourth way that we can heal from the yoga community, and this is an extension of what I just spoke about, and I feel like there's this energy in a lot of Bikram Yoga studios that is very predatory, and maybe from a teacher, maybe from a student, but I have experienced harassment, and I'm open to having a conversation of maybe I was wearing things that are too revealing, maybe, but what the irony is that I wasn't wearing anything different to what other people were wearing too. So I am open to hearing, because I do believe in taking responsibility. And I was even open to having the conversation with the studio owner about what I could do to make sure that this doesn't continue. However, that was not necessarily the response that I received. And it does seem to me like there has been, because I know people personally who've come to me and told me that they've been made to feel uncomfortable by teachers, by other students, by sometimes the owner. So I strongly feel like there needs to be some kind of accountability about sexual harassment. And I am no expert in this. I've experienced it, like I said, at different places that I've worked at. And I'll get into this later in another topic, but I was stalked by a student once at a different yoga studio, like full on stalked. He had to be asked not to come back to the studio, and became a whole ordeal. But in general, I feel like there isn't protection given to teachers, and you're just expected to, especially because I used to teach downtown, and I had to give up my morning classes because I felt so unsafe. And a lot of homeless people, and I'm not saying all homeless, I have a lot of empathy for homeless people, but a lot of mentally unwell people would gather in downtown, and at that point, you don't exactly know what's going to happen. And I remember one incident, this guy was yelling across the parking lot and harassing students as they walked by. And the first thing that I thought was, I feel really bad for them, but if I bother the owner, she probably won't care. So I do think that, and maybe this obviously does fall into accountability too, the first subject that I spoke about. But I really think it's important that the owners care more, because I've heard horror stories about teachers being harassed, students being harassed, and the owners just being like, oh, well, what can I do? And it's you can do more. You can definitely do more. And this isn't just one studio. It's happened at frequent studios, East Coast, West Coast, that I've seen, and in other countries that I've been to too, where I've practiced Bikram. I don't want to say exactly where, but I have seen that. So I think as a whole, there needs to be boundaries, personal boundaries, taken more seriously, and leadership caring more about circumstances of people being harassed. My fifth and last way that I think that Bikram Yoga studios can heal, the community can heal, is cleanliness. Now, I can't tell you how many times I would teach a class and it would be completely dirty, stuff on the floor, just unkept, you know. And I think this falls into accountability of the studio owners. I actually had such an awful experience teaching at this yoga studio in Silver Lake, the one that I was sexually harassed at and the one that I've spoken about before. But I remember this story so clearly, and the floor used to really, really stink. And actually, now that I look back at Yelp reviews, I looked back at the Yelp review, I saw that it wasn't just me. Like, I would think, walking into the studio, I'm like, did I put on deodorant today? You know? So I remember I said that one time to management, and I was like, oh my gosh, sometimes when I walk in here, I'm like, did I put on deodorant today? So I got an email the very next day from the owner. She was like, well, please just make sure you're putting on deodorant, because sometimes, in a nutshell, sometimes you stink. And I was like, whoa, that is really, really horrible to say to somebody. And that just falls back into the respect. So after I left the studio, I was talking to another teacher from a different studio, not a Bikram studio, and I was talking to him, and he was like, oh yeah, I was going to teach there, but it stank so much I couldn't stay there. And I was like, so it wasn't me. They were trying to make it seem like I was the issue. And mind you, at any other work I've had, I've never been told that I smell. So I just found it weird that I told the manager that, and then the owner comes to me and sends me an email and says that I basically smell. Meanwhile, it was the flooring of the studio, and people would complain all the time about it. It just fed into this idea of treating people like shit for no reason, and it was just a very weird experience. One day maybe I'll write a book about it, about that particular place, because I was there for quite a while. I was there for a year and a half. No, almost 2 years actually, yeah. But anyways, I feel very strongly that the cleanliness as a whole needs to be brought back. And most of it is the flooring. I feel like, because Bikram was big on having carpets, because apparently he got sued, and this is what I've heard through the grapevine. I've actually heard this from somebody who used to work for him, who ended up suing him. I'm not going to say who. But I've heard from somebody who used to work for him that Bikram was afraid of being sued because of the carpet. I mean, because of any kind of slippery, so that's why he liked the carpet. So they had carpet for many years, and then people were getting like nail fungus and all these issues. So they removed the carpet. Also, carpet stank. I remember the days of carpet, because I've been practicing Bikram for 11 or so years, and I remember the days of carpet, and it was like, oh my gosh, hold your nose when you go into the studio. So they got rid of the carpet, and then they introduced floors. Now, different studios they were like having issues deciding what kind of carpet, what kind of replacement they wanted for the carpet. So some went with wood, some went with this QVC flooring. QVC is the type of rubber, and it's said to like seep deeper into it. I don't know. I feel like a lot of it's just a bunch of lies. But they said it's like antimicrobial, all that kind of stuff. I'm not sure if it was. It still stank. And stinking is usually a sign that there's bacteria growing. So anyways, I feel like flooring could be improved upon due to the cleanliness. And obviously I'm not a studio owner. I'm just saying that I feel like that would be very helpful, and just energetically, you know. You don't want that stagnant, smelly energy. I feel like if it's cleaner, if it's clearer, if it has a sense of freshness, at least attempt at freshness, because at some places the cleaning would not, I mean, there's some Bikram studios that I know for a fact they were supposed to have cleaners, and the cleaners wouldn't show up, and it's just like the showers looked like garbage, they smelled, and just like, imagine being in somebody else's sweat. So I just think cleanliness needs to be worked upon, and not maybe even from the owners, but I think sometimes they need to just invest in having cleaners who do their job and who show up to clean the studios, because as a teacher it just wasn't nice to hear that the place that I taught at, and sometimes I would clean because I felt embarrassed about it. I felt embarrassed that, hey, I teach at this place, but it's always dirty, so I would try to clean. I sometimes clean the showers and that kind of stuff, which was not my job, but I just felt like I had to, because I wanted to be able to represent where I taught at well. And it just became very dirty, grungy, and so forth. So I think cleanliness is a huge part also with the teachers, kind of in general. Sometimes I feel like some teachers would just show up to teach, not necessarily Bikram Yoga, so maybe this doesn't completely apply to this, but I just notice sometimes yoga teachers just don't make an effort. They just like show up and just show up and it is what it is, take me as I am, and often joke about not showering, and I could never ever not go a day without showering. I think we're so fortunate, most of us, to live in places where we can shower, even if it's 2 minutes a day, just to take that effort. So that's what I have for you this episode, the ways that we can heal the Bikram community. I'm interested to hear what you have to say. I feel like I've heard from people from around the world actually who have circumstances or scenarios very similar to the Bikram community, where there was a guru who people were having issues with, and so forth, where some people speak nicely, kindly of them, some people don't, like in a conflict amongst the community of various yoga practices and studio. So I'm just interested to hear what you might think, might say. I'm very open to all of that. My email is listed in the description of wherever you are listening or watching, and I'm so grateful that you listened to this, and I will see you next week. Take care. Thank you so much for listening to the Unwellness Community podcast. I'm so grateful that you took the time to do so. Please make sure that if you're on YouTube, you subscribe. If you are listening on Apple Podcast or Spotify, leave a review, preferably 5-star or whatever you would like to do. Thank you again. See you soon.